Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may happen to be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to Nautel's Wednesday webinar. I had to take a quick check at my watch to make sure that we were in the right day of the week. Today, we're talking about HD radio. We're going to focus primarily on FM. We did a little FM primer in the Tech Talk last week, and the week before that, we did an MA3 webinar. So I'm going to talk a little bit about FM and what this is really geared to be. Of course, marketing gets their hands on stuff, so there's a couple of minutes of sales pitch, there's the real meat in the middle, and then a couple of minutes sales pitch at the end. Bear with me for the beginning and the end. In the middle, I'm going to be running through the various setup screens in the HD multicast and try to give you some ideas on how you can optimize your setup. I'm Jeff Welton, and as always, I try to find somebody smarter than me to help me out with this sort of thing. And today I grabbed once again the handsome and talented Alex Hartman from our service department, from St. Cloud State University Engineering, from Optimized Media Group. Alex is a man of many talents, many hats, and today a really colorful shirt. If you're looking at his camera, maximize that puppy, take a screenshot, post it on Facebook. We'll have some fun with it later on. Uh, I don't know if Shane Tobin's here, but I know Shane's wife would be lurking in the background, so we'll definitely get some entertainment value. Alex,
Oh, I'm
thanks for
sure.
coming. Welcome on board.
You're gonna make me look bad, look like the guy who knows everything. You gotta find some
That's
other
it.
guys who know stuff.
Oh, and I see Alex's boss is in the audience. So, John, look, Alex is wearing the official Nautel service shirt. There you go. All right, moving on. What are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about why Nautel. And like I said, the deep dive on things to know, other ideas are going to play a little bit of science project, but not going to give away too many secrets, maybe a few, and play a little bit of guess what's going to happen in the future. So John is very appreciative of you wearing the fluorescent orange shirt. The good thing is after this you can go out deer hunting and you'll be all ready to go. It just might be
Oh
a little.
yeah, this is what you call Minnesota fall colors.
That's it. Now, the normal housekeeping. I see a lot of people in here that have been to a bunch of our webinars. I see a few fresh faces in here, or fresh names on the list, I guess would be a better way to put it. We do try to make these interactive. You do have a little question box down there. Feel free to type in your questions, comments, anything that you think that you'd like to see covered. And if I don't answer it right away, it means that I think that it'll fit in later, or it means that we just don't have time and I'll get to you an email at the end of it. But we try to answer everything. If you're an SBE member then and certified, sorry, then by all means, this does qualify for half of a certification credit. So under category I of the SBE recertification schedule, make sure that you fill in your spreadsheet or little note list or whatever you use to keep track of that sort of thing. And when it comes time to get recertified, you'll be one step closer. If you're not a certified SBE member, how come? It's an easy thing to do, and sometimes there's some beneficial information. They've got a shiny new website with a lot of good information in there. All right, moving forward. So why not Alpha HD? Well, of course, we've got the GV series, which is the most efficient box out there. I think pretty close. Alex, you want to
Yeah,
weigh in on that?
it's still can't be beat. This long in the game, I've still got serial number 1/2 running full tilt, so can't argue with
So
that.
backstory for everybody that doesn't know, way back a million years ago, well, I think it was 2013-ish,
14, yeah,
14.
yep.
We were coming out with this new product line. We wanted to show it at NAB, but so a lot of times when a manufacturer shows something at NAB, they don't necessarily show you a finished product that's ready for sale. We'll show you something that's coming and see what the interest level is, and that decides whether we're going to build it. In this case, we wanted to show something that was ready to roll and ready to go out the door. So I called Alex up and said, hey, I know you need a new transmitter. Your old one's been giving you some challenges and there's some things you want to do, it won't do. How'd you like to be a guinea pig? So we shipped him serial number nothing a month before NAB. He installed it with no documentation whatsoever and a little bit of hand holding and maybe some curse words, and got it on and did a report at NAB about it. So I think we actually sent you the serial number after the transmitter, didn't we?
Yep, and the documentation was sitting there waiting for me when I got back from NAB that year. So,
So to take one more plug on the GV, Alex has got one of the more unique air handling systems on the planet. Insofar he's tested this transmitter at both 160 degrees Fahrenheit and minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm exaggerating a little, I think, but not a lot.
that's a little bit of marketing number in there, but yeah, minus 18 was as low as I took it, which is cold no matter how you deal with it. And yeah, when it's a negative pressure room that's driven by a belt and belts break, and of course they'll break in July summer day in Minnesota where it's 100 degrees out. It doesn't take long for that room to get hot.
Yeah. Now on that one, it got warm enough that the plastic bezel started to get pretty soft around the touch screen. But as far as I know, transmitter's still running. Yeah.
Yep, and I've, knock on wood, never replaced a power supply yet. So
Well,
77,000 hours on those power supplies.
it's just because I growled at you to fix your grounding and your ferrites, but that's a whole different discussion. All right, so moving forward,
Mhm.
um, we do also for the HD have the HD multicast, and we are,
Mhm.
like I said, I'm going to focus a lot on the nuts and bolts under the hood. But before we go there, there's a few things that I wanted to touch base on. And one of them, the big one, is why, when everybody else went with an embedded system, did we go with basically an industrial computer? Alex, you've taken one of these apart. Actually, I think you took it apart long before we had you working on the payroll. Um, Alex's motto is "I void warranties." I think we're going to get that on his next Nautel t-shirt.
I have
Uh,
one upstairs in the dresser.
there you go. See, um, but under the hood, that is pretty much an industrial computer, right?
Yes, yes, it is. It's a single board computer with a backplane. Runs industry standard heat spec type things. So it's made to withstand what I do to things.
Probably a good thing. And we'll talk a lot about some of the things that this lends you, like the ability to load codecs or processing directly into your HD generation system. And we'll touch on some of the cool things that you and Philip have been doing with the folks over at Telus Alliance,
Yep.
and maybe reference some of the webinars that we've done on that topic.
Hmm.
We'll also talk about some of the science project stuff like virtualization and offsite hosting and things like that that we can do. So we'll have a
Sure.
little fun all in all. Obviously, the I can sit here and tell you this thing's awesome all day long, and I kind of get paid to do this. I'd like to think if it was a piece of crap, I'd tell you that too. But as a rule, you're best off going to our customers. I know we've got a few of them in the audience, and some of them are quoted here. So marketing guy sent that, said you got to put this up. So there you go. You've got the customer quotes as well. Little bit of the history behind it. This embedded technology really started around 2006, 2007 when Xperi, then Ubiquiti, came out with the Gen 3 software. And we all launched Gen 3. This says 2008. As I remember, it was September 2009 when our first one shipped, and we were about a
Hmm.
year ahead of everybody else, give or take.
Hmm.
And again, I mean, I don't know exactly when everybody else started shipping, but I know it wasn't 2009. So that was pretty cool. As you can see, the curve is almost exponential because 2008 to 2017, no big changes. And then we came out with this a year or so later. The other folks came out with the embedded platforms. And there have been a lot of advancements since then. The ability to add audio processing, codecs, there's been a software revision, whole bunch of stuff. Alex, talk
Hmm.
to me a little bit. You've had some time under the hood. We'll get to
Hmm.
the features on the next slide anyway, but what are the
Hmm.
things that you find about this?
Well, because it is a standard PC, an industrial PC running x86 64-bit, it's an Intel chip inside.
Hmm.
No different than you would find in a server. Um, eh, because of that, you have the entire PC ecosystem at your fingertips. unlike an embedded design where you have to vet and know specific drivers, which I will say 99.9% of the time, you don't have access to the code to modify to get new stuff into. It's usually pretty closely guarded. Whereas in a standard PC implementation, I could call someone like Telos Alliance and say, hey, can I buy a driver and put it in here? And sure,
Right.
nothing different there.
Or, for
So,
example, we've got a Lynx PCIe sound card in there. If you wanted to
mhm.
rip that, throw your own sound card in, because it's a Win 10 machine, it's pretty basic to get the driver to make that happen.
Right, exactly. So the reason why we use those types of cards is because overall implementation. It works nicely with everything else, the GPS synchronization, stuff like that, and the timing.
Right.
But yes, in general, um, you know, we know out there that people do build their own. It's not really good, but you can.
I
But
haven't looked
that's
to
the
see if anybody from Expiry is in the guest list, so
yeah.
tiptoe through that minefield.
Right. But I've taken calls from customers who have and they want support on the software, not necessarily the hardware.
Hmm.
Those are the kinds of the things that you can do in a PC ecosystem. And when Xperi releases a new code base or a software base, I don't have to wait for my software development team to say, well, that doesn't work with our sound card or that doesn't work with our GPS card because it's already there.
Right.
So development cycles are so much faster when you're in this world. We can move on a
Right.
dime.
Yeah. Chris Hayes has asked about Windows updates. I like the creative spelling of Windows there, Chris. And I'm going to touch on that in a couple of slides. So,
Mhm.
Alex, just keep that in your as a
Yep.
placeholder. But
Right.
John Van Milligan mentions they thought they had a power supply failure in one once, but found out it was a bad outlet on the power bar. So that's always reassuring on my side of the fence. You're still off the air, but it's not my fault. Not my, what
Right.
do they say? Not my circus, so to speak.
Right.
So now this is where we get to Chris's. See, this is Chris. I told you we were going to get to it soon. Um,
Mhm.
the version of Windows we use is the long-term service branch, LTSB or LTSC, long-term service contract, I think they
Channel.
call it.
Channel.
Channel, same
Yep.
thing.
Mhm.
This different name, same thing. The thing to remember about the LTSX versions of
Mhm.
Windows is that they're done as a full release, vetted, tested. This is done secure as we can make it with what we know right now, and they don't issue updates.
Mhm.
So Chris, to answer that, there are no updates. Now, I'll quantify that because every 3 or so years, 2 to 3 years, it varies a little. They come out with a new LTSC release. They're on
Mhm.
the third one now, I believe, maybe four.
Yep. Third.
Third. And we will look at the differences in the new release and make the decision at that point whether we decide it justifies a full release or an update of our software. Then a lot
Mhm.
of it will depend on licensing too. I mean, if we've got licenses for the previous generation. So this is run as a closed embedded system. It's not designed to be updated on a regular basis because one of the things, it doesn't have Windows Store, Cortana, Microsoft Edge, Calendar, Camera, Clock, blah, 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 blah. You can see it all on the screen. I'm not going to read the wall of words to you.
Mhm.
So that's the big thing right there.
The big quantifications for LTSB and things that people that make people skittish about seeing Windows on an appliance. Um, and they think Linux is better. Actually, Linux is more dangerous, simply because you don't know it and other people do. Um, Linux is just as vulnerable. There was a bug that was found in a very common piece of software that had been out for 40 years that made systems vulnerable in Linux.
They had
Um,
40 years of software 40 years ago.
oh yeah,
Okay.
Linux is based on Unix, sys5 Linux, Unix.
I
So
thought you were taking some
those
marketing
applications,
advice.
oh no, the 40 years, technically 40 years wasn't that long ago. But
So,
uh,
well, the other
in
thing
computer
too
terms. But
yeah,
the point of this is that LTSB, the reason why Windows and Microsoft came out with the LTS system was for the financial industry. Um, if a lot of people have ever dived under the hood of an ATM, money machines, those were running Windows XP embedded.
Yeah.
because it had to run in that ecosystem. Well, when they discontinued XP and Windows 7 and Windows 8 embedded, this was their Windows 10 answer to that industry. So
Right.
if it's good enough for the Royal Bank of Canada or Wells Fargo to run on an ATM, it's fine to run on your transmitter.
Yeah, and there is the quantification that in a major security issue, they have been known to issue updates before, but
Yes.
in an LTSC environment, the auto updates are disabled. So it doesn't
Mhm.
just grab control of your system and do the update right now. You pretty much have to physically tell it, hey, I want to load this now.
And our units do ship with a pink piece of paper right on top saying that the firewall is disabled, updates are disabled.
Yeah.
To let your system administrator know that this is what this thing will do.
Right. And the advantage to that, of course, is that it's not going to shut itself off and go
Mhm.
do an update on an unscheduled basis. The disadvantage is you better be practicing some safe internet there, safe cyber, if you will.
Mhm.
Uh, let's see. Open source does not equal vulnerabilities. No, Chris, you're right. Open source does not equal vulnerabilities. The challenge becomes, though, that with many different renditions, and I'm going to pick Linux as an example. Whether you're running Mandrake, Ubuntu, or may or may not have an impact on what drivers you can get and various other things. So,
Mhm.
I'm not saying
Package
one's better than the
dependencies.
other, but for what we wanted to do and what we want to do, Windows is absolutely giving us a lot more power and flexibility than we could do in a Linux
Yeah.
world.
The world basically still runs on Windows, guys. Unfortunately and fortunately at the same time. They still have the lion's share of the market.
Yeah,
Try and find a driver for an audio science card in Linux
right.
without going to audio science.
Mhm.
Those kinds of things. Um, they are
So,
out there, but someone else coded them. Do you trust
right.
them? Are they vetted? Probably not.
Anyway, the
Um,
short answer is it just gives you a lot more flexibility to do your own tweaking as you may want to down the road.
right.
So,
And
moving
there's
on
nothing wrong with
forward.
open source. Believe me, I'm a big proponent of it.
Oh, yeah. I may or may not run some of it at the house. At the moment, yeah, I think I've got at least one Linux box running in here. Mandatory marketing picture to break up all the text and get some different colors. So it is user configurable. You can tell it whether it's an importer and an exporter, or an importer or an exporter. And
Mhm.
that will, especially when we get to the end with the science project discussion, that will figure pretty strongly because we'll talk about some of the things we've done with like New Hampshire Public Radio, where having that flexibility is huge.
Mhm.
It runs Gen 4 or can run Gen 3. Now, clarify that if you could, Alex. I know Matt's
So,
in the background. Matt's probably squirming about now, so we may dig Matt out and unmute Matt to answer that. So,
so Gen 3 software was functional, but not exactly user friendly. Gen 4 is definitely written by a programmer for a programmer, but they did ensure that they are compatible with each other. All the manufacturers get the same stuff from Xperi, so we just have to custom tailor it to what we want to make it work together. The whole point of the system is that Nautel will work with Rode, will work with Gates, without having an interoperability problem. That was a goal of Xperi.
assuming common platforms, and I'll
Right. But
quantify that
at the
because
at the
I
base,
can't.
V2X, I2E, the protocols that
Right,
HD radio runs are compatible.
right. But definitely, like if you've got a Gen 1 system which used LVDS for the transport stream, and
Mm,
the importer export or the XGen was in the HD generator, you're going to
hmm
need an adapter to connect a current generation of
Right,
anybody's.
right.
So that's just those sort of things. Work, as I always say, call your manufacturer if you got any questions.
Yep,
We got
yep,
folks who like Alex who get paid to answer these things.
right.
Um,
So with that, the Gen 4 system is built on the Gen 3 systems, things that Xperi learned, what
mhm.
were good, what were bad, what they could do better. And input from broadcasters just the same. A lot of people were, Gen 3. How many, show of hands of how many people have had dickens of a time trying to put artist experience on a Gen 3 system versus a Gen 4 system, which is very simple.
Yeah, and we'll
Things like
get
that.
into that too. One other thing on the HD multicast, and I call this our best kept secret. Around about 2007, 2008, we came out with NRHD, Reliable HD Transport Mechanism. And we've got, I think it's HDRT, it's got
Hmm.
15 different acronyms over the years.
Hmm.
That's included by default with the HD multicast. So if you've got an HD multicast, you've got this. The one thing it does now, and Alex will quantify that, there is an HD multicast screen later on, so we'll get into a deep dive on that. But the thing that the HD multicast is best at is tearing apart the E2X, the data stream, and repackaging it to handle a low bit rate pipe. So
Yes.
if I've got, and I'll give you a worst case. In Vail, Colorado, we've got a translator that's being fed an E2X stream over a satellite uplink, a single 160 kilobit satellite uplink.
Hmm.
And we're running HD data over that with good success. I mean,
Oh yeah.
subject to the usual, you dump a foot of snow on a dish, it doesn't react so well. But
Hmm.
uh, but the actual data is going just great. This was designed primarily to eliminate the bursty nature of HD, where you'll see a lot of situations where it doesn't run so well over some of the older 500K LAN links, as an
Right.
example.
Right.
So, now these days with the with all the ubiquity stuff and you can get a Wi-Fi bridge for a nickel 95.
Hmm.
It's less an issue, but if you want the ability to put a main and a standby transmitter and run addressable data where you're feeding the data only to those two IP addresses instead of running it in broadcast mode and flooding your network with it, which is
Hmm.
the default for HD, by the way,
Yep.
then this NRHD is the only way to do it. Um,
Right.
Side note, if you have somebody else's gear, we can provide it in a couple of boxes, one on each end of your STL, and repackage it that way. So talk to your
Right.
sales guy. All right. Anything you want to contribute on this slide before we carry on and start getting into the nuts and bolts?
Uh, the nuts and bolts are covered by the rest of it. So yeah, let's keep going.
All right. So what do we got inside? Well, we got an i5 6500 processor, which is the same processor in the laptop that's running this webinar for what that's worth. Or so it says anyway on the little sticky note that I haven't managed to scrape off yet.
My laptop too. Imagine
So
that.
here's one of the other things. Here's a question. Hard drive, spinning hard drive,
Nope. SSD.
solid state drive. Because
Yep.
I have heard more than once, oh, they got a spinning hard drive. No, no spinning hard drive. There
Nope.
is a CPU fan.
There
Um,
is. And a power
I
supply
could
fan.
count on one hand the number of times I've seen a CPU fan fail, but power supply
Right.
fans maybe a little more.
Right.
Again,
And
that's something.
there's a couple chassis fans. I mean, fans are fans,
Right.
just like anything else.
Now, we could take the fans out and let it run hot. Anyway, so there is a processor in it. It does a whole lot of stuff. What's the nominal? Say I'm running the thing HD multicast, running HD 2, 1, 2, and 3, and 4 on it. So for traditional use, I'm running it at the top end with everything going. What's the CPU usage?
Like 4%.
Yeah. So
It's nothing.
so you have done a bunch of playing on this, and we'll talk about that later. But so folks, just keep that 4% number in the back of your mind. Yeah, John Van Milligan says remember to clean the filters, and that's absolutely the case of anything with an air filter in it. Clean it on occasion.
Yep.
Um, GPS monitor, and we'll touch this screen, but we've got an actual screen where you can see what your GPS is doing now.
Yep.
And used to be you had the little LEDs on the front where it's like GPS yes or no, and then you go to a sub menu. Now it's
Mhm.
just a little pop-up. And this is one of the things came up on Facebook the other day. Somebody was talking about the Gen 1 stuff and how you had to have terminal server or Terraterm or anything
Yeah.
like that to get to
Yeah.
it. And that's not the case with these, is it?
Nope, it's not the case. On the multicast, there's two lights on the front, power and GPS. So the two idiot lights you need to know if the thing's running right.
Yeah.
If you see an orange or red GPS light, check your GPS antenna, cable or the antenna itself.
Hmm.
And green power. Is it on?
Right. Yep.
Those are the two things you need to know from the front faceplate.
So pretty basic stuff there.
Hmm.
Integrated GPS receiver, 1 pulse per second with an ovenized 10 meg crystal. I assume that's to keep things rolling if you do lose the GPS.
Yep, it does have, I believe, 24-hour holdover, so it'll be as stable as the GPS over a 24-hour period without the GPS signal.
Okay, good deal. And then and the 44 word clock. This is kind of important.
Hmm.
This is something that we get into the discussion a lot, especially if you're using separate processors for your analog and HD1, which is not really recommended, but we get it. Sometimes you got to.
Hmm.
If that's the case, use the 44 clock from the HD multicast as the external sync for your other processors to lock your audio signals together. It'll help your time alignment immeasurably, and we'll talk about that a little too.
Yep.
So, is that about right?
Yep.
And I
Biggest
know
thing I've
your
seen
preference
more,
is,
yeah, the
say
thing I've
that.
seen more and more is that people are putting, these newer systems on older, which is still current hardware, like a Mosley Starlink, which by
Mhm.
default those things run at 32 kilohertz, not 44.1.
Right.
And HD really, 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 really wants to run at 44.1 kilohertz. You have a plus or minus like 10 hertz variance or 30 hertz
Yeah.
variance from that
Mhm.
before things go sideways with it.
Right. The downside to that, and we've had this discussion before, is that low bit rate audio does not like up converter. Well, digital audio in general doesn't like up
Right,
converters.
right.
So if you've got the option, definitely try to transport, try to do everything at some frequency at or above 44.1.
Hmm.
But if you don't have that option, then last week we talked a lot about processing and bit rates. We'll not get into
Yep,
that because it's really not that's how you make HD work, but it's not a function of this box.
right.
So, all right, so we've got a big honking Lynx card.
Hmm. Lots of audio inputs, lots of audio outputs at your disposal. You can do with as you please. The original design spec, and we follow that to a T, which a lot of guys don't, is that HD on paper, and we believe, we go based on the on paper, not, what is today, but what could be tomorrow.
Hmm.
HD says it can do up to 8 channels. So we put an 8 channel sound card in,
Yep,
8 stereo channel sound card. So if they ever come out with an HD8, we're ready for it.
yep. And that's one of the things I was talking about earlier, where future proofing is really important. And with the purpose-built boxes, the embedded systems, you don't really have that kind of flexibility. I mean, tomorrow, if I saw
Well,
David Layer in there, if NAB Labs came out tomorrow and said, "Hey, we found a way to tweak the HD, Expiry is going to approve HD 12," we'd swap sound cards and be ready to roll.
well, not only that, even today, the Horizon is MP11 with an HD5.
Yep.
We're ready.
So, yep. So, I mean, that's the sort of thing, and you're actually running MP11, and not to give away too much out of the store, but
Yeah.
you're playing guinea pig in MP11 mode right now,
Mm,
aren't you?
Yep, my guinea pig had guinea pigs. So yes, I do have a system running on that same serial number 1/2 transmitter running MP11
With an HD multicast,
with an HD multicast.
the one you wouldn't let me play with yesterday.
Yeah, well, university rules, not mine.
Yeah, sure. So definitely Lynx card is cool, but the other good thing, and this we'll get into this in the setup as well. If you don't want to use the Lynx card, you want to run IP audio, you've got that option too, because big honking computer.
Dual Ethernet built on.
Yep. So moving forward, okay, this is arguably one of the coolest things to know about this box is you've got a little thing in the top right corner of every window that says help,
Hmm.
and it actually seems pretty useful.
Yeah, they actually wrote in all the descriptions. If you click, not the help menu, but the help button.
Hmm.
So if you click the help button, you get this window, which actually gives you a description of what every box means, because again, software developers write for software developers.
Right.
Sometimes you
And
need an explanation of what a box does.
And I should back up a step. What I've done here, and a couple of slides, I'll show the main screen for it, but this is the HD multicast, I guess, controller manager. What's the official
It's
term?
we call it the Gen 4 software suite. So
Yeah,
this is what you would see. Again, it's designed to be an appliance. As such, they didn't take much into the aesthetic design.
right.
We don't need pretty pictures to make it do what we want it to do.
Marketing
Um,
guys are squirming now.
oh, I know. But it's functional, and
Yeah,
it's very functional. So
right.
within this, think of if you were running like an AutoCAD where you've got windows inside of windows with different functions, and you can pull up different portions of it. So it's a
Mhm.
software suite that is called by one program.
Right. And the reason that I didn't start with a picture of the desktop sort of highlighting which button was because the desktop for our lab HD multicast has got a bunch of Alex's science projects on it too, and some things we're just not ready to share at this point. John Van Milligan made a note too about the bit rates that Starlinks will run 44.1 if you set them up that way. You change several from 38 to 44.1.
Right, and it's hardware
And
dip
that's
switches
true,
on the modems. It
right?
is
But
hardware on
the
the
client
modems.
link did not give you that option, as I recall.
Correct, and
And,
there's some challenges there too.
mhm,
Certain I've For the college we have a Starlink as well. I can't run it at 44.1. Just there's something interfering on the receiving tower that it doesn't allow my modem to cooperate at that bit rate. So I
right.
have to run it at 32. So there
Yeah.
are reasons why you have to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, just like if you're running, well, and this is the one thing too, if you're setting up a point-to-point Wi-Fi bridge like a Nano Beam or, and I dated myself, but picked the earliest Ubiquity, but one of the
Right,
Ubiquity systems or any of the other ones out there, figure out what bandwidth you need and set yourself one or two notches above that. Don't run the thing wide open. The narrower the bandwidth, the more reliable your signal is going to be. That's just a side note on STLs. It's got nothing to do with this, except since STLs usually feed these, it does.
right.
So, all right, moving forward. So there, this is more what you're going to see on that first, where you've got like the system UI. And so what we've got right here, we're looking at artist experience stuff.
hmm Yep. So the inside the Gen 4 system, when you open up the SysUI launcher, it'll have a menu across the top of, what other screens do you want, what subsystems do you want to access? The exporter, the subchannels, the HD2 through 8s, the MSAC client, the JAMSAC system of Gen 3 was integrated in Gen 4. It's its own animal now, and it's a lot easier to use. So you can open up the MSAC1 client, and then in there's a menu and say, here's your station logos, your static logos, just upload your file. Uh, Caveat to that, you can't just throw grandma's bakery.jpg in there. You have to go to this website here to make sure you're doing it right. Again, made by programmers for programmers. The hdlogoverify.com website. So if you got station logo one, for instance, the file name is going to be like SL $1 HD1 $0001 dot PNG or dot JPEG. It is very confusing, makes no sense until you sit there and dissect every little part of it. But there's also a pixel limit, I think 160 by 160 or 200 by 200 pixels, has to be in a certain color space, so on and so forth. So before you go and say, hey, marketing, give me the logo for the radio station, I'm going to put it on the radio, run it through this first to make sure you're doing it right. And it will tell you exactly what you need to do to make it right.
Cool. So that'll save a lot of grief. Now, Lewis Downey asked, does the Gen 3 or Gen 4 software platforms need Java for the GUI? And
The
I
entire
think
Gen
there's
4
someone,
system is Java based.
but it's Java calls. Yeah, it's not,
Well, the Gen 4 is self-contained Java. It does not require
right,
you to install Java or run the Java updater through Windows. It is distributed with the application.
right. And that's the way I understood it too, because I know Java as embedded calls is still, I mean, that's going to be around for a long, long while.
Every Blu-ray player in the world uses Java, so it constantly gets updates, constantly moves things around. There's a lot of devices out there.
Yeah,
What Xperi did was they have a Java license from Oracle and they distribute their build with their software.
Yeah, but the awesome little pop-up in your lower right screen that says, "Hey, there's a new Java update." No, not
Not a
an issue.
thing. Yep.
So very cool. All right, moving forward, the GPS screen. This is useful because,
You need to know if it's working.
yeah.
You know, GPS rules still apply here. You need 3 satellites for a 3D lock. To get accurate time, you need 4. So
Mhm.
the front of the multicast has that little light on there, like I was mentioning. It'll be yellow if you've got less than 4. If you have
Mhm.
less than 2, it goes red or 0 if it's not happy with it. Basically, it's that nav valid is the checkbox there. If it says no, if you can't navigate using the GPS signal you have, it'll go red.
Yeah.
If it's yellow, it means it's got enough to lock, but the accuracy is questionable to, I
Mhm.
think, 3 feet or 4 feet, or uh, I want to say it's like 20 milliseconds. It's not nanosecond tightness
Right.
as far as timing is concerned. And that's really what we're after, is the timing here. Not
Mhm.
necessarily, we don't care. Your transmitter site isn't moving, so we don't
No.
care about navigation with it. But we do care about the timing from the satellites.
Cool.
So that's what that monitor will do.
Now, on the next one, and this is probably the main screen everybody sees when they first click in, and you've got your little sync state, and the two red light buttons, or two red lights, just mean I hit the stop button and stop the HD stream.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an important note because you'll see right here we've got the active config drop down,
Mm-hmm.
and you can change the configuration, whether it's MP3, and of course it's all written in some code that makes sense to somebody but not me.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about that on the next slide. But to make almost any change, if you go to almost any page, it will show up with everything grayed out until you actually stop the service. So you make the change and then start again.
Right. Gen 4 is based on runtime read configuration, meaning that any changes you make, you will have to save and restart the system for it to read it, because it only reads the configuration when it turns on. It's not a
Mhm.
live update type system.
Right. And the good thing about that is that makes it a whole lot more stable. The bad thing
Mhm.
is you do have to stop it to change it to start it again.
Right. I mean, the one
The
piece of documentation I still keep in hard copy is the manual for this box, because the decoder ring is in the back of it.
So, you know, I keep mine in PDF form on my laptop and my phone just because I can search a PDF faster than I can read through a manual. But when you're looking at that one page, so if you only remember one thing, this is the thing you need to remember right here. If you're used to working with Gen 2 or even Gen 1, and I think Gen 3,
Hmm.
you'll remember that you could go into your HD1 and you could set the bit rate anywhere. The minimum at the time was like 48. I
Yep.
think it's 38 now.
Yep.
Anyway, you could set it anywhere above that minimum. You could set it right down to the bit. You could set your HD2, your HD3. You had infinite control, well, infinite within the spec of the number of bits you got to play with.
Hmm.
But on Gen 4, that went away.
Yes. And note that even in all as far back as Gen 1, the bit rates were not common numbers you would see as a bit rate.
Mm,
Nothing you know of correlates to 47,464. It's not a
right.
power of 2 number. It's not. It means nothing to you because there is other things in there like frame boundaries and things like that, and sync bits and stuff like that that
Mhm.
are also in that same data stream.
Right.
So that's why you can't just enter 64,000. Well,
Mhm.
it's actually like 63,313 or something like that.
Right.
Um, so you do have to take a little care in that respect. Now in Gen 4, uh, they've gone to this configuration model where you don't get that chance to set your own bit rates. You use these templates
Mhm.
that are in there, and the descriptions are, if you read them slowly, just like you're a 3-year-old, I had to do it too, is okay, MP1 mode, 3 HD, okay,
Mhm.
3 HDs, HD1 high. Oh, okay, so my HD1 has the high bit rate.
Mhm.
So again, you have to break it down into that little thing, and then the underscore AE for artist experience. If you select a
Right.
mode that does not have AE, will not get artist experience. That is to
Mhm.
say, you won't get the pictures, but you still get pad data, PSD, artist title stuff.
Right.
That's always in there. But AE is specific for slicing off a little bit of bit rate there to send the pictures.
Hmm.
So
And the cool thing about this is that, I mean, you do have the little cheat sheet. If you're lighting up an HD4, HD4 is 24 kilobits by default, or 22,141 for the audio, and whatever the difference is for the data. Is that correct?
correct, correct.
So it doesn't show up on the list at all.
Right, exactly. So in a P, and there's partitions, and that's what the P stands for in these things.
Yep.
Um, so you'll see channel up there in the list, P1, 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 P1. There's also a P3, which is where the HD4 typically goes. You
Hmm.
can do 4HD in the P1. You only get 96 kilobits on a P1. The
Yep.
24, the P3 is where they add the extra 24, which is another partition that goes inside.
Right.
And that will be the same thing with HD5, where they're adding a P4 partition, which is another 24K on the inside.
Right.
So,
So for the folks that really, really like to tweak stuff and adjust every little thing, this is a little more of a challenge. And, Gen 4 may not be your ideal solution, but for the vast majority that just want to set it, forget it, and walk away from it, this
mhm.
is, I haven't heard a whole lot of complaints about the bit rate, the options they're given anyway.
I've talked to customers who swear they can hear the difference between 64 and 60. Maybe. I don't know. I can't.
Better, yeah, better ears than me.
Right,
And again, that's one of those situations where we work with what we're given, and this is what we got. So
right,
and this is pretty, if I'm not mistaken, this is consistent across the band, regardless of manufacturer. If you're running Gen
right.
4 or higher, this is what you got. And
This is,
yeah,
and the other reason for this is that, we as a transmitter manufacturer don't make the receivers. That's, on the other side of the coin. Those bit rates are selected because those are what the receivers understand. So if you
right.
put an arbitrary number in there for your HD1 that means
Hmm.
nothing to a receiver, it may not lock it.
Right. So I've got my active configuration. Of course, the lab was being used to torture an MA3 AM setup at the time, so that's what it set. Other interesting note: the HD multicast is AM or FM, depending on which button you click.
Yep, we
Um,
we play with both kinds of music.
yeah, country and western. So there you go. After we click that button, so I've got the exporter UI. What am I looking at?
So this is the only time in the software outside of that configuration dropdown with the secret decoder ring where you will see where the bits per second are sliced into the various partitions. They're all grayed out, you can't touch them. But it
Hmm.
gives you an idea of what those bits are for the P1, the P3, the P4, so on and so forth, of where the bit rate is. So
Right.
so this is where the exporter gets its details.
Hmm.
Things that you're supposed to do that a lot of people don't is simple things like your FCC ID, and that is your facility ID. You're supposed to plug
Hmm.
that in there. Your station name, where it says HD there, that's your call sign.
Yeah.
Or whatever you want to put in there. You can prepend, postpend, so on and so forth.
Hmm.
And if you have no PSD pad data, this is what goes in there. So if you see that
Station message.
hdradio.com and stuff like that
Yeah.
at the bottom, yeah, that's what scrolls across people's radios if you don't configure these parts.
So,
So
and talking about the pad data, we'll get to the configuration of that, the AE stuff too a little bit, but the pad data, we don't generate that. I mean, the automation system spits it out, and depending on your automation system, it may spit it out in a format this can work with directly, or you may have to go through a pad generator.
or
And
yeah, some kind of middleware that can
and
translate.
that's important to note, because yeah, you're not if you don't have the ability to do that. And Marco mentions Arctic Palm, and yeah, Marco's the Arctic Palm has the center stage
Yep.
that
And then there's the
works
jump to
really well.
goes that are out there, the formerly
Yeah.
TRE and a couple other guys out there that have done this.
Yep. I think Greg Oganowski, Modulation
Index,
Index. Thank you.
index.
I get it wrong every time, first time, but they had a product too,
Yep.
Pad Bridge.
Yep.
Enco had
Hey,
Palmpult at one point.
they still do. Yep.
So there are a
They're
lot
out
of
there.
options,
Yep. They're out there.
but the point is that you need to look to see first if your automation system will generate pad data, because it may already do that. And
Hmm.
if it doesn't, then you will need a pad generator in between.
Yep.
For testing purposes, we can do a little static test thing too, can't we?
Yep, we have an application available on our website there for PSD Gen. Just a little command line Windows program. You can just run in there. You can give it a bunch of stuff, and you can simulate because it'll do transmit and receive. So you can make sure if you're not seeing it on your radio, something that you think is wrong in here, you can run the same program as a receiver
Hmm.
from that program on the HD multicast and then the transmitter on your automation machine and see if the ports are even open. So if
Right.
there's something lost in translation there. So it's a diagnostic utility. It's available on our
And
website there.
and I mean that's one of those telling tales out of school and not for public release, but the flexibility of having stuff like a Windows-based system is that somebody who looks a lot like you could write a script to create something like that.
Yep, not gonna say anything more than
Okay.
that.
Tiptoe through that minefield too.
Yep.
Okay, system big page. What's on here that I really need to know about?
This is where the system needs to know about your transmitter. So this coincides with your XGen and your transmitter. So you need to know the IP address of your XGen. That's what goes in here, the port, the protocol, whether you're using TCP or UDP. Usually defaults is fine from us. We use the 10.10.10 networks for all of our stuff out of the box.
Hmm.
Um, Safe to say a lot of guys aren't using that, but more and more are.
Right.
Uh, HD does not like noisy networks. So if you put this on your office LAN and you got a lot of Windows traffic sending a pile of ARP messages every 2 seconds, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah,
Um,
and I mean
I
that's one of those situations where you're better off partitioning the network, putting it on its own subnet, and assigning QoS if you need to.
Right, exactly. So you do want to kind of take a little bit more care and consideration into the network of the HD stuff. It is a little bit more sensitive, or using the reliable transport system, which does ignore a lot of that.
Right. One other thing to note here, and this is important, coming back to the if you're mixing and matching between manufacturers, we don't all use the same port numbers.
Correct.
I want to say, and I'm guessing here, but my memory tells that we use 10,000 and 11,000 as the default ports for exporter and
Right.
importer. And I want to say Gates Air and BE use 8,000 and 9,000. I could be wrong on that. Definitely check with them.
Yep.
But again, that's the kind of thing that you want to pay attention to. If you're mixing and matching and they don't play well, that may be a why.
Absolutely. So, and again, here, if you were going to, this is where the IP address, if you're setting reliable transport, there's a section in the manual. Again, there's a specific IP address on the HD multicast you have to send to get reliable transport to function.
Hmm.
So pay attention to that. Here you could also send this to the broadcast address. So if you've got multiple transmitters, N+1 or standbys or whatever, or even translators that are on the same network segment for
Yeah.
this, one exporter can send the same HD data to multiple XGens.
Yeah, and so this is where we can run it in broadcast mode, like you're saying, where we send it to every IP address on the network, or with the NRHD configuration, we can set it up to do point to multipoint to up to 10 IP addresses, I think.
16,
Is
16,
it 16 now? Okay, cool. That was one of them, that's like I say, I've never hit more than 4 or 5, so I've never really had to count that high, and I ran out
right.
of fingers.
And it also
Uh,
will run across unidirectional STLs that way, just the same.
Right. Now, the MPS panel, the main program service, what are the
Yep.
things here we need to know about? And you'll notice again that we had the HD multicast running at the time, so everything is grayed out.
Right. This is where you set if you're going to do delay or anything in the exporter and not in an audio processor. This is your primary input. Uh, well, specifically MPS is where your HD1 audio is coming from. So this is
Right.
where you select which channel on the links card is coming into.
Hmm.
So that's where
Now,
this is set. And blend control is where you enable what they call ball game mode for those who are still using that.
over and above that, the blend bit setting, that's not just an enable or a disable. There's a on command or something like, I forget what the third command
Yeah,
is.
click the help button. It will tell you.
Not in this it
The
won't,
not
but
this, yeah, this one it won't, but yes, there is another setting there that
yeah,
I've never run into, quite honestly. But
right.
this is if you know for your HD1, and if you wanted to listen back, you can also select an output device. So if you got a local monitor at your transmitter site and you want to hear what the HD is coming out of the box, you can certainly assign that.
Yeah. Now, this gets to be important because especially, and I'm beating on the blend bit, if you do run ball game mode and you want to gracefully bring the delay in and out,
Hmm.
then you can, if you enable the blend control, you can send it a remote command to turn ball game mode on or off. And over the course of whatever time frame you've set to, typically half an hour or so, it
It will
will
blend back in.
gradually ramp that, yeah, ramp the delay in or out, depending on whether you're coming
Right.
out of ball game mode or going into it.
And that's
So
covered in
that,
the ADD tab there on the screen.
yeah. And I don't remember if we hit that tab or not. If we did, we'll find out shortly.
Yep.
So moving to the PSD.
Yep. This is PSD specific for HD1,
And so
not your
acronym for
HD2s, 3s, and
PSD,
4s.
program service data, yeah?
Program service data. Yep.
Hmm.
So the one thing that we could pay attention to here is send default PSD at start. I usually have that checked. So it'll send this data
Something,
as soon as it
yeah.
turns on. The core enable is really the key thing to have enabled here. If you disable that, you don't get your artist title stuff.
Right.
Comments and commercial stuff, I honestly don't know of any station using that. Where you find, valid URLs, stuff like that, pricing information, and the comment stuff I've never seen used, but it usually ubiquitously, because that has to be sent from an automation system.
Right.
We can take it in if you enable it, if your automation system supports it. It's
Hmm.
not something that we deal with commonly. The ones
Now,
we do deal with is the core, which is title, artist, album, genre.
right. Now, the cool thing about the Core Enable 2 is if you put a default, like this has got the hdradio.com message, you might put a station positioning message in there and it'll tell you right off by looking at your radio whether or not you've lost the data stream from your automation system.
Right, right. So like for me, for the college here, I have your sound alternative in there as title, as its default PSD. So it'll send it on start.
Mhm.
And then the PSD messages over on the side of the screen there on the right hand will actually give you live updates to make sure you are getting PSD data from an automation or middleware. It'll say update received, here's a timestamp, and here's the information of what I put in.
Right.
And that will scroll live.
Yeah, and the other thing to mention on remote access for this, I mean, this is totally web accessed. It's not because thinking back to the old days when we used, I think I did use VNC to get to this.
Hmm.
And I mean, so I was using a VPN and then opening a VNC client to access the IP address for one back in the office. So it's
Right.
pretty basic to get to.
Right, and we do ship the multicast with the Node.js UI as well. So there is a web interface on port 3000 by default that gets you to all the same screens to configure the
Yeah.
unit through a
Right.
website.
All right, moving on. We do have the ADD page.
Yep, so here's where you would do your diversity delay if you were to do diversity delay inside the multicast itself. So here's your audio input for your FM. This is not the digital side, this is not your HD1, this is your analog before it hits your processor. So you would send it, from your STL in here and then come out delayed and then send it back through your processor.
Right.
Or vice versa, processor can become before or after, either one. But there's the delay samples. It is counted in samples, again, made by programmers for programmers. They don't know what seconds are, they said samples. So that 281,922 number, I believe, equals out to 7.3 seconds by default.
Mhm.
So,
So there's
and
a
that
whole
rate
bunch of,
number there is the ramp time. So 50 samples per second ramp time.
right. And that's if you're ramping up and down to bring the delay in or out, or when you make a change.
Correct, correct. And then you can force delay to 0 by just clicking that box. It will go like that.
Right.
Um, so you can the blend ADD enabled blend control override. Again, it's like
Mhm.
the third graders say it slow. It makes sense when you say it slow.
Yeah. Now, the other thing about the force delay to 0, when you do an instantaneous change, remember there is a 7.5 nominal 8-second time difference between your analog and your HD. So if you do an instantaneous change, you're either losing 8 seconds audio or you're doing it again, depending on which
Hmm.
way you're going. So that's something else to pay attention to.
Yep. So
And that's one of the things, if you do the delay, if you do ramp delay at all, If you need to switch in and out of delayed mode, it's always best to do it in the HD multicast as opposed to in the processor, in the exciter, or any external location,
Yep,
because
processors are going to jump.
I'm not
Processors are
aware.
going to jump.
Yeah,
Yep.
and the exciter does the same. I'm not aware of any external application that
The
does a
Justin
graceful
can
jump.
the Justin can if you set it up, but you still have that initial jump, but it can,
Mhm.
because that's its job, is to move things around without you hearing it. But the
Gracefully,
Innovonics
right?
Justin 808 will gracefully start moving things around, but I don't think it'll actually like blend to zero, now that I think
No,
about
no, its only job is to correct deficiency. So, like if
it. Right.
you've got a Justin 808 pulling an off-air signal and using that to correct your audio delay, then if your delay does happen to wander, either your clocking's off, you lost GPS, whatever, then the Justin will auto compensate. Um,
Yes.
any of our marketing guys, plug your ears for the next 5 seconds. The Gates Airbox has a similar process. It's just a receiver built into the box
Yeah, it's a
that
tuner.
does the same. It's the same thing as having an 808 mounted in the next rack, but
Hmm.
601 half does the other. It's an option.
Hmm.
So there are solutions to that. We'll talk about what we did for that in a little bit, but getting back, sysconfig panel.
Sysconfig is usable. This is when you take the multicast out of the box, it'll be in config mode, not operate mode. So that's where you set your licensing and your IP address and all that other stuff. This is the panel where you tell the system what mode you should be in. Configure, or if you're importer only, or if you're exporter only, or both, if you're in config mode or operational mode.
Right.
Again, the help button is very, very helpful.
Hmm.
But again, these are the types of things where you click the set, click save, restart system, because this is a runtime configuration.
Right.
The auto runs are also set in here. So if you want to auto start the thing, with the exporter UI running and the HD2 client and the MSAC1 client, this is where you set that stuff.
Right. So again, lots of lots of things to think about.
Hmm.
And
There's
speaking
the
of
auto
thinking
starts.
about,
Yeah.
yes.
Yep. So
And
by default they're falses.
so here's the one. Start all clients only. What
Yeah.
happens if I
So
activate that?
so here's some of the gotchas of the system. Again, written for programmers by programmers. Um, Start all clients only. You would think it would be let's start all the clients, but not the system, right? That would be my first jump to thing is like, okay, I'm going to start my HD2, I'm going to start my MSAC, and cool. No, it actually shuts off the ability of getting into the importer and exporter system control. It turns on only the clients.
Hence the word only.
So, and the
Now,
only way to get out of this mode is to reinstall the software. Don't do
so
that.
the reason for this, and this is something important to remember, is that this system, again, one of the powerful features of it and the flexibility is that it lets you run separate audio clients. Like, say I wanted to host audio clients remotely, maybe at a totally different studio,
Say you're an
then
on-com that's got a church locally that wants to use the HD3 on a Sunday. Well, you can set up a computer with a little processor, software processor, or outboard processor, or whatever, and just a little. My favorite little toy to show off is this guy. It's a PC and a Raspberry Pi form factor.
that's
Believe it or
two
not,
weeks in a row you've gotten to show that.
right? It's my new favorite toy. I mean, this is a quad-core CPU in a Raspberry Pi form factor. Lends itself perfectly to this application where I could put the HD3 client on here, just a client, tell
Hmm.
it the IP address of my multicast, and it will log in remotely and send the data and turn on my HD3.
Right. So
So you
if
can
you
divorce
remember,
the clients from the
if
unit.
you remember the old units where you had to manually activate the SPS clients one at a time, and you'd have SPS2, SPS3, et cetera, and so on. Well,
Hmm.
basically, what we've got here is the ability to run only an SPS client in a dedicated box,
Hmm.
and like you said, it's another really powerful way of interfacing the two.
Right,
So
and the old Gen 3s, you could do that, but you were actually sending raw audio.
right,
Doing this, it's actually already pre-encoded audio.
yeah. So again, a cool thing. Now, one more thing we talked about the NRHD, and this is where it comes back to the point to multipoint, the ability to feed the data to multiple transmitters in an N+1 setup or multiple sites.
hmm Yep.
So,
So this is really what it is. Either you leave, again, in the manual, we touch on it in the multicast manual, but there is a full reliable HD transport manual as well.
mhm,
Uh, if you're just doing it based on MAC address over a unidirectional STL, leave the IP address zeros, put in the MAC address, because then it'll use ARP to do that.
right.
Or if you're on the same subnet, IP address, go.
Yeah. Now, one other thing, and this has got nothing to do with this, but anybody running earlier generation, Gen 3 stuff or older, the Exporter Plus, Importer Plus, I don't know if it applies to other manufacturers, not my circus in that case. But there was a little bit of a token issue over the past couple of days. So side note
Yeah.
from the HD multicast, you want to address that just so we've got a resource for it on that we can get to?
Yep. Yep. So yes, there was in fact back in the day in Gen 3, they were like, oh, no one will be still using this older system on March 12th, 2021. So let's expire the keys then. And this specifically applies to those who are running artist experience type things on the older Importer Plus. You'll start seeing a lot of scrolling error messages saying token error. We reached out to Xperia and said, hey, what's this all about? And they're like, yep, token's expired. Here's how you fix it. So we do have a fix for that as well. The keys do expire, and the new ones expire, I believe, 2038. There's an
So there's some
interesting, yeah, there's a reason behind the 2038 number. For the computer nerds out there, 2038 is the year that we run out of the 32-bit integer. That
time.
So that's when 32-bit software basically stops counting and starts over. So,
That'll be our new Y2K, if you will.
right,
Uh,
that's also kind of a marketing point. Again, remember, the multicast is a 64-bit machine.
Planned ahead there. Well,
Yep,
2038, I'll be retired. It'll be your problem or our kids' problem, whoever.
kid's
Uh,
problem, but yeah.
so going forward, one of the things we've tried to do with this is develop a system that does allow for a lot of flexibility. Um, the challenge becomes that you can still, with a hardware-based box, only work within the limits of what you can do when you got to put a piece here or a piece there.
Mhm.
So some of the things you guys were talking about were leaning more toward software type solutions.
Right,
And
the
this is the
landscape
part
now is,
I'll say I'll break in for a second. We've hit the top of the hour. This is the part where we hit a little bit of the future talk
right,
sort of thing. But
right.
we'll be
We,
about
we've,
5 more minutes and then we'll be done.
yeah. Yep. So we've covered the software of what's on the multicast, and the landscape today in compute is virtualization. Look at your desktop, your Windows desktop, your laptop. When you're sitting there editing a Word document, what's the computer doing otherwise?
Mhm.
Nothing. So it's still consuming the same amount of power. It's still using all that resource, but you're only doing one task. So virtualization is starting to stack. I can have this one machine do the work of 10 desktops that only use 5% of their CPU.
Mhm.
So I started looking at this saying, we are only using 4% of our CPU for this. I've got 96% to go. What can I put there? Uh,
How much can I load in before it breaks?
right. And so with our CTO, Phil Schmidt, we work pretty closely on this, and we agreed that we would put ourselves into an artificial limit to make sure we're not overstressing the machine. We didn't say 96%. We looked at it and said, we have 67% left. So we've got plenty of room there for it to breathe. And then this
Mhm.
is very typical in data center deployments as well. They never run the machines at 100%. They
Right.
always leave a little bit of overhead.
Well,
So we
I mean,
decided to
you
do the
don't
same
drive
thing.
your car at red line either. Same
Right.
thing.
Same with the transmitter. We don't drive it to redline. So we're building in that buffer for allowing us to do things like this, where we can run
Right.
New Hampshire Public Radio, for instance,
Yeah.
where we have run. They had a bunch of older Exporter Plus units, which still work just fine with Gen 4, but they needed to generalize and create content. for
Right.
5 or 6 different radio stations. So we created a machine that ran 6 importer instances on the same piece of hardware.
Right.
Um, the
And
Gen
this
4
is,
software uses a lot of IP ports, so you have to hide them from each other.
mhm,
And that's where the virtualization segment came in. Same with
right.
audio processing. Very, very powerful audio processors these days are based on general purpose compute.
Mhm.
There's plenty of room in here to make an Omnia 9S run, for instance, or
Well,
multiples thereof.
and that's one of the things that we were talking about earlier, where you physically tell it what your input source is. There's
Hmm.
no reason you couldn't have multiple software processors built in and then tell it HD1, your source is Omnia 9-1.
Hmm.
HD2, your source is Omnia 9-2. And
Yep.
and then tell the Omnias, okay, you're taking your signal from Links card channel 1 or
Yep.
directly from this IP address on a live
Correct.
wire feed or whatever.
Right. Exactly. So the flexibility is of putting everything into this box that you're comfortable with. Now, keep in mind, the old adage of IT is why have one when you can buy two at twice the price.
Right.
It is still a PC, and IT realm is always make sure you have your backups, test your backups, make sure that they're functioning. But the moral of this story here is that there's a lot of overhead sitting there not being utilized that could be utilized for other things.
Right.
Think of it this way, is that the HD multicast is so integral at this point that it is treated like an exciter. We take it
Hmm.
seriously. If your HD is off the air, we treat that as an off-air emergency
Right.
in customer service.
Hmm.
That's your livelihood just the same as it is your analog.
Yeah.
So same thing here. This machine is integral to that function. And that goes to saying with all the other manufacturers just the same. If one of the other guys' stuff breaks, your HD is off the air just the same.
Yep.
So to that point, let's make sure that this machine runs, but let's not waste the power that's sitting there. So it can run other things like streaming coders, Omni Enterprise 9S. It can run Livewire drivers. It certainly can do a lot of other things. And
Yeah.
that's
I
where the
mean,
mad
you could,
scientist part comes in is what else can we throw at it? Like, how about an
right.
automation system for
Yeah.
emergency
And
backup?
there's no real reason you couldn't do that either. And I mean, if you put a virtualized automation system in there and IP it or, forward it directly from the studio, you could theoretically have folks at home accessing the automation system at the transmitter site.
Right, disaster
And,
recovery solution, type
right.
of thing, or an automated HD4, for instance, where you just wanted to, you don't have space at the studio. Well, you got plenty in this computer over at the transmitter.
Yeah. So the
Um,
short answer is this thing is, again, a really powerful computer that's basically running at full tilt, barely being used. So why
mhm,
not play with some more of the features? And
absolutely.
that really comes back to one of the biggest benefits of this over a physical purpose-built box that doesn't have any room to grow or adapt or change or to
Right.
develop or.
Yep.
So,
Moving
there
on a
is a
dime.
lot more. What's that?
Moving on a dime. You
That's, yeah,
know,
okay,
it-
turning on a dime. But yeah, yeah,
yep.
exactly. I mean, the difference is we see an idea and it's, oh, you can do that, which
Yep.
is why we've got the mad scientist department, you and Phil.
Yep.
Speaking of you and Phil, this was one of the cool sets. So this is your solution for wandering delay.
Yep.
It was less solve the symptom by putting in something to correct the delay and more
Uh,
a eliminate the problem by getting rid of the wandering to begin with. Is
yes,
that a
exactly.
good way to describe it?
Yep, don't let the problem happen in the first place. The Justin 808 is a great box, but it is a reactive solution. The tuner inside the 4FMXI product is a great solution, but it's reactive. The problem
Mhm.
already happened, so you're
Right,
trying to correct it. Our solution is why let the problem happen in the first place that you shouldn't have to correct already?
right.
So that's
And
what our webinars that we've done with the Radio Air Chain Innovation have demonstrated how to solve it.
right. And I mean, in our examples, I mean, we use the Omnia 9S or Enterprise 9S because for our purpose, it's the perfect solution for that. But
Again, the
I
software
suspect,
changes easily versus an
right,
embedded solution.
right. So that's that's more up to what you want to do.
Hmm.
So I'm going to start hitting the summary part here. We've handled all the questions pretty much as they've come in.
Hmm.
So, the big things are flexibility and the configuration part, the gotchas, little
Hmm.
things like not telling it load audio clients only.
Yeah.
Um, or putting in the station ID and
Hmm.
some message other than hdradio.com, which is awesome,
License
at least
key,
it is. Oh,
license key
license key.
updates. Yeah, license
Yeah,
key updates. The Gen 4 system enforces that 1 or 2 year license time frame that Xperia mandates.
yeah,
It will turn off if you don't do it.
yeah.
Um,
And so by all means, set a reminder or a calendar or something. I think it gives you a warning of like 10 days or some number.
it does give you a warning. I don't remember what the time frame is, but it does warn you. But it will shut off. Unlike the
Yep,
Gen 3 platform that's like license expired. You just can't
yep,
change your config. No, this
right.
time they shut it off. So
So pay
make sure you're
attention to that.
keeping it. Yep, those are the gotchas that right there that are a human problem, not a computer problem.
Yep, exactly. So summary wise, we love our Nautel transmitters, we love our Nautel multicast, blah blah blah. We got a lot of stuff going forward. I'm at 10 minutes past the top of the hour, so this is where we turn on the afterburners.
Hmm.
Uh, this webinar, as with all of our webinars, will be archived. You can get to it on the link on our website or through our YouTube channel. New Waves newsletter just came out a couple, 3 weeks ago, so by all means, look that up.
Hmm.
And on that note, we are at well over 10 minutes past the top of the hour. So I want to thank you all for spending your little extra time with us. Alex, thank you very much for
Hmm.
dropping by and spending time with us today.
Yeah.
Alex's boss, if he's still listening, John, he's wearing the shirt again. All right. On that note, folks, thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time. Bye now.